For over 2 centuries, Sparta was the most feared military power in the known world. Not because of its size, not because of its weapons, because of something that cannot be manufactured or purchased: the complete indifference of its citizens to comfort. They did not build walls around their city. The men were the walls. And then, in 404 BC, something changed. Sparta won the greatest war of the ancient world. After decades of conflict, Athens fell. The Peloponnesian War was over. Sparta stood at the summit of Greek civilization, dominant, unchallenged, victorious. Within 50 years, it was essentially finished as a power. No foreign army dismantled it. No plague consumed it. No earthquake erased it. The city that had never been conquered from the outside collapsed from the inside. And the weapon that undid it was not a sword. It was gold. The question worth asking, the uncomfortable one, is this: what is your gold? There is a pattern that almost no one talks about because it does not look like failure. It looks like success. You spend years building something: a career, a body, a financial foundation, a relationship. You delay gratification, skip the easy options, hold yourself to a standard that makes life harder than it needs to be. And it works. You arrive somewhere you once only imagined. And then, slowly, so slowly you do not notice until it is already done, the structure starts to loosen. You sleep a little later. The discipline that felt essential starts to feel optional. You skip the training session, then another. You avoid the difficult conversation because things are going well enough. You tell yourself you have earned this. 6 months pass. You look at the habits you once had and cannot entirely explain where they went. The person who built what you now have seems further away than expected. This is not weakness in the ordinary sense. It is something more specific. What happens when the system that forged you was built entirely around scarcity, and the scarcity disappeared? The engine was running on danger. When the danger stopped, so did the engine. Sparta knew this problem. It just did not know it until too late. Subscribe to the channel if you like the content. It's very important. To understand what destroyed Sparta, you first have to understand what built it. The entire social architecture of Sparta, the agoge, the communal meals, the prohibition on trade, the ban on walls, the obsessive regulation of daily life, was designed around a single principle: that comfort is the enemy of readiness. Plutarch, in his Life of Lycurgus, describes a society engineered from the ground up to make ease impossible. Citizens could not own gold or silver. Wealth was held in iron currency, deliberately heavy and worthless outside Spartan borders. The point was not poverty for its own sake. It was to eliminate the very conditions that made softness possible. And it worked. For generations, it worked with a consistency that astonished the rest of Greece. But in 404 BC, the general Lysander returned from the Aegean campaign with the spoils of war. And with them came something Sparta's entire system had been built to prevent. Plutarch documents it plainly. Lysander was the first to bring gold and silver into Sparta in significant quantities. He understood, or claimed to understand, that the state needed these resources to sustain its new position of dominance. The treasure was deposited in the public fund, but contact with it was enough. Aristotle, writing in the Politics, is less forgiving. He identifies the Spartan collapse not as an accident of history, but as a structural inevitability. His diagnosis: Sparta trained its citizens for adversity with extraordinary precision and trained them for nothing else. The entire educational system was calibrated for scarcity. No one had thought to prepare Spartan men for what came after victory. When the conditions changed, the behavior changed with them. The prohibition on private wealth was quietly eroded. Generals who had spent decades sleeping on the ground began acquiring property. Men who had eaten black broth in communal mess halls developed appetites for the kind of luxury Sparta had spent 2 centuries treating as disease. It is worth noting, and historians like Paul Cartledge emphasize this, that gold alone did not kill Sparta. There was also a catastrophic decline in the citizen population and institutional rigidity that prevented adaptation. The full picture is complex, but the gold was the catalyst. The moment the prohibition was lifted, even quietly, even partially, the psychological infrastructure began to fail. Because the infrastructure had never been built on genuine conviction about what mattered. It had been built on the absence of alternatives. When the alternatives arrived, the conviction did not exist to refuse them. Neuroscience has a name for what happened to Sparta. It is called hedonic adaptation, and it is one of the most reliable phenomena in all of psychology. The concept was formalized by researchers Philip Brickman and Donald Campbell in the 1970s. The core finding is as uncomfortable as it is consistent. The human brain adapts rapidly to any new level of comfort, reward, or achievement, and returns to a baseline emotional state that is largely independent of circumstances. The promotion you worked 3 years toward feels extraordinary for approximately 90 days. Then it becomes the new normal. Then it becomes insufficient. This is not a character flaw. It is a feature of the system. A brain that remains permanently satisfied stops being motivated to find food, seek shelter, or avoid threats. The machinery of desire is built to reset. It has to. But here is the problem. Sparta's entire system, and, if you are honest, much of what drives you, was constructed not around purpose but around pressure. The agoge did not produce men who loved discipline for its own sake. It produced men who could not afford not to be disciplined. The hunger, the cold, the public accountability, the constant threat of humiliation. These were not tools of character formation. They were the removal of options. Edward Dacey and Richard Ryan, whose decades of research produced what is now called self-determination theory, draw a distinction that maps almost perfectly onto Sparta's failure. They differentiate between motivation that is extrinsic, driven by external pressure, reward, punishment, or social expectation, and motivation that is intrinsic, rooted in genuine interest, personal values, and a sense of who you are when no one is watching. Extrinsic motivation is powerful. Under conditions of genuine constraint, it can produce extraordinary performance. But it is inherently fragile because it is entirely dependent on the external conditions remaining stable. Remove the pressure, and the behavior collapses. The person who ran every morning because they feared what would happen if they stopped will stop running the moment that fear dissolves. This is what happened to Spartan citizens when gold arrived. The system had never given them a reason to be disciplined beyond the impossibility of being otherwise. They had not developed what psychologists call autonomous motivation, the internal alignment between behavior and identity. They had not asked themselves what they valued. The system had answered that question for them, relentlessly, for their entire lives. And when the system softened, even slightly, they had no internal compass to fall back on. The researchers Roy Baumeister and Mark Moraven found something else relevant. Self-control is not a fixed trait, but a dynamic capacity that atrophies under disuse just as reliably as it deteriorates under overuse. The Spartan soldiers who spent their retirement in comfort were not simply enjoying what they had earned. They were, at a neurological level, unbuilding the very architecture that had made them formidable. The hardest question this raises, and the one worth sitting with, is not whether you are disciplined. It is whether your discipline has roots deep enough to survive the disappearance of whatever is currently forcing it. Most systems do not. Most people do not find out until the pressure lifts. Sparta did not end suddenly. It eroded. The walls did not fall in a single day. The soldiers did not collectively decide to stop being who they were. It happened the way almost every collapse happens, through accumulated small surrenders, each one individually defensible, each one quietly expanding what was acceptable. The general who brought gold back told himself it was for the state. The citizen who acquired land told himself he had earned it. The institution that relaxed the prohibition told itself the old rules were relics of a different era, and none of them were lying exactly. They were simply no longer asking the harder question. The harder question is never whether you deserve the rest. It is whether the version of you that rests still knows how to get back up. What the Spartan collapse reveals, and what it costs something to acknowledge about yourself, is that the structures we build to make us capable are more fragile than the results they produce. You can spend years constructing the habits, the routine, the standards, and produce something real and lasting in the world, and still find that the scaffolding was tied to conditions you no longer have. The antidote is not to refuse comfort, nor to manufacture artificial hardship to keep the engine running. The antidote is something Sparta never had the institutional language for: the clarity to know why you do what you do when no one is forcing you. Not because the system demands it, not because the consequence of not doing it is visible, but because you have decided, with enough intention to survive the good times, who you intend to be. Detsai and Ryan call this integration, the point at which a value is no longer something you follow, but something you are. It requires the kind of honest self-examination that discipline often crowds out. The question of what you are actually building, and why, and whether it would survive contact with everything you have been working toward. Sparta is not a cautionary tale about wealth. It is a cautionary tale about systems built entirely on external constraint, and what happens when the constraint ends. 2.5 millennia later, the mechanism is identical. The constraint might be debt, or social pressure, or fear, or the memory of where you came from. When it eases, the question it leaves behind is the same one Sparta could not answer. What are you made of when nothing is forcing you? The answer to that question is not built in moments of adversity. It is built in moments exactly like this one, when everything is fine, when the pressure is low, when the temptation to coast is entirely understandable. The gold did not destroy Sparta because it was gold. It destroyed Sparta because it revealed that there was nothing underneath the system except the system. You can be different, but only if you decide what is underneath before the gold arrives. If this made you think, even uncomfortably, subscribe. The next one goes deeper.